This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Lo Kui Su. Tonight's top stories. China's president marks 25 years of the return of Macau, swearing in a new leader, Sun Shu Hing, on a mission to shift the economy away from excessive dependence on a single industry. South Korean investigators deliver the second summons to the president after he failed to respond to the first. Yoon Suk-yeol ordered to appear on Christmas Day, taking questions on why he declared martial law. An agreement to search again for a plane that disappeared more than 10 years ago. 239 people were on board MH370 to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur, with most of the passengers on board from China. Australia promising a boost to policing in the Solomon Islands, providing funding and training as it works to counter encroachment from Beijing. In business, China keeps its benchmark lending rate steady after the Fed signals fewer cuts ahead. And also in East Asia tonight, Taiwan turns to dogs to sniff out the root of a problem that could bring trees down on unsuspecting residents. China's president has urged Macau, the world's biggest gambling hub, to diversify its economy and develop new industries to enhance its global influence, as the former Portuguese enclave marks 25 years since returning to the mainland in 1999. Xi Jinping presiding over the inauguration of Macau's new chief executive. Sun Shu Hing pledged to uphold the one country, two systems principle. This marks Mr. Xi's third trip to Macau as president. He last visited in 2019. That's when anti-government protests rocked Macau's neighbor, the former British colony of Hong Kong. And for more, CNA's correspondent Wong joins us live from Macau. Mr. Xi calling on Macau to make bold reforms and to cultivate new industries. Under the new administration, what will they be planning to do to meet those wishes of Mr. Xi?
Well, find new growth areas, for one. Number two is to really maximize and tap on the potential and opportunities that the larger one country, two systems policy has to offer, because Macau is part of the Greater Bay Area Initiative, which will include the likes of Shenzhen, Hong Kong, another special administrative region, as well as Guangdong, offering the platform of some 86 million people available there. And resources and land will be abundant for Macau to tap on over in China. And more importantly, President Xi Jinping called on Macau to really develop for the sake of the people. Now, these are all expectations that President Xi Jinping has laid out for Macau, and Macau's chief executive, Sun Shu Hing, is very, very aware of that, knowing the fact that the gaming industry has pretty much taken the limelight from this city. This city is the only city in China to be able to recognize and allow legal gambling, but that has to stop in terms of diversifying its economy. They know that they have to move away from the dependency on gambling, and therefore the new chief executive, Sun Shu Hing, says that he will focus on areas, but more importantly, because he was a former top judge, the first thing that he wants to do is to reform the legal structure here, to update the system, because the current structure of the legal system was inherited from the Portuguese, and therefore it requires a lot more updating, particularly when the city wants to move into coming up with new sectors, focusing on new areas of growth, for example, modernizing financial services, as well as going into high tech. So all of these will require the rules and regulations to keep up in terms of the investments in there. And obviously one point as well, to attract talent, top talent into Macau in order to really exploit all these industries with potential growth. Now, earlier they spoke about the one country, two systems policy, about the benefits it has really brought from Macau.
一国两制具有显著制度优势和强大生命力，是保持香港、澳门长期繁荣稳定的好制度。一国两制蕴含的和平、包容、开放、共享的价值理念，是中国的，也是世界的，值得共同守护。
25年来，在中央政府和祖国内地的支持下，在何厚华、崔世安、贺一诚3位行政长官的带领下，特区历届政府与社会各界开拓进取，接续奋战，共同创造了举世瞩目的发展奇迹，盛世莲花绽放出无比顺利的光彩。
May, of course, 25 years since Macau returned to mainland China. That was 1999. How are people on the ground viewing this milestone?
You ask different people and you get pretty different responses. You get a segment of the society, for example, the older ones, they're very happy with that simply because they have benefited over these last 25 years. Remember that back in 1999, when Macau was handed back to China from the Portuguese rule, they only enjoyed a GDP of about 4.7 billion US dollars. 25 years later, they are now seeing a GDP growth of 47 billion US dollars. So that is a huge leap. And obviously the older generation, they believe and have seen how the government, the administration under China has really taken care of them, helping them in social welfare, providing great healthcare needs for the people, as well as an education system that helps this population. But on the flip side of it, you do have some people who are very concerned about the fact that the young people are leaving Macau. Macau only has a population of some 700,000. And so the talents are actually leaving Macau to seek employment, to seek better education elsewhere. So you have two different segments, and with this integration into the one country, two systems policy and having increased competition going forward, the people here are also feeling a little bit worried that they may not be able to sustain themselves, and the jobs, the employment situation will become even more competitive. I spoke to some of them on the ground and they shared with me their thoughts.
個個又公開啦，係嘛？做啲小企業啊，希望政府關注下啦，係嘛？關注下嗰啲小做我哋嗰啲小生意啦，啲租金啊或者即係冇猛咁升上去啦，保持到依家咁樣，大家有飯食啦，係嘛？
而家個政府係對我哋嗰啲基層嗰啲市民咧，都係關顧啲咯。即係以前澳葡時代咧，完全不管你哋咩問題咁樣，但係而家咧，即係話有譬如長者又有嚇，即係話等等嘅福利啦，係咪先啊？而且我哋呢啲咧就可以基層，好似我哋小販咁，又可以免我哋牌費啦。街市係免租，咁啲都係對一啲基層嘅市民都係有啲幫助咯。
我都明白，其實可能會喺澳門可能有機會會冇咁 diversify， 而家都係好暫時好單一，但係我覺得其實你話係咪唔可以其他行業都可以喺澳門發展到咧？我又覺得唔係，即係其實可以有機會。
Macau knows it must diversify its economy and move away from the gaming dependency. But how it's going to do that and how it intends to accelerate that progress, well, a lot of people will be watching to see what action the new administration is going to take.
Oh, thanks for that. May Wong reporting live from Macau. For more on Macau's efforts into diversifying its economy, we have with us Sun Shu Hing, he's Professor and Deputy Director of HKU Space. Thanks for joining us, Professor Loh. My colleague there, May Wong, talking about diversification, looking ahead to this new leader and his new administration suggesting that under him, finally, Macau might make that shift that's been talked about since at least 2005 to shift the economy away from primary dependence on the gaming industry to a more diversified economy.
I think the new chief executive has to implement the central government's policy directive of diversifying the economy in a much more faster way. Because in the past 15 years or so, economic diversification was just a talk without any implementation plan. But the Chinese government has been helping Macau tremendously by encouraging and requiring Macau to merge and cooperate with the in-depth cooperation zone with Hangqin. So we have witnessed a very fast development of Hangqin in the past year. So with Sun Shu Hing as the new chief executive, he and his team will accelerate the process of economic diversification away from its over-dependence on casino capitalism.
All right, the new CE of Macau may have every desire to meet that demand from the central government. But in the past, so have leaders. And this has been very, very difficult for all sorts of reasons. What really changes now beyond, for example, that blueprint we've seen last year, the 1+4 integration plan, the plan to diversify into very specific sectors for Macau, beyond blueprints, to bring a blueprint into concrete realization? Does Macau have what it takes now in the next 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, I think the central government has already helped Mr. Sam a little bit further because in the past year, in the in-depth cooperation zone of Hangqin, a joint management and implementation committee was set up, composing of the officials from Zhuhai, Guangdong, as well as Macau. And this committee is actually formulating and implementing new regulations and rules for Hangqin. And in this area, it is basically a kind of a hybridity, combining Macau law with mainland Chinese law. And also in this in-depth cooperation zone, the so-called 4+1 formula is implemented quickly, including new economic sectors like convention and exhibition center, big health, and also IT development, as well as cultural tourism. So I believe that in the coming 5 years, the in-depth cooperation zone will really grow very rapidly because now there are already almost 2,000 Macau households living there, and about 128 civil servants from Macau are now stationing in this in-depth cooperation zone. So I think with this help and full support of the central government in Beijing, economic diversification will be speeded up.
Professor Low, of course, Macau is a very special situation. We heard our correspondent there earlier talking about the need to attract top talent. Now, Singapore faces the same problems. We want also to expand in the same sectors that have been identified by both Macau and the central government. But of course, one problem we face here, and Macau will likely face as well, is attracting the depth and breadth of human skill, talent, to fill these positions so that you're actually competitive in these areas. Does Macau have an answer to the chronic shortage of human talent?
Macau has traditionally relied on talents. In the 1980s and 1990s, Macau relied quite heavily from Hong Kong talents. After the handover, Macau has been actually relying on mainland talents. And this kind of talent attraction scheme, which was addressed and mentioned briefly by President Xi Jinping yesterday, this scheme is allowing more mainland Chinese, not only from the Greater Bay Area, but also from Zhuhai, Macau's neighbor, to work, reside, and study in Macau. So basically, I think the central government in Beijing understand that talent flow and talent support for Macau will be essential for this economic diversification. So as such, I think the talent scheme has been accelerated and it will be speeded up also in the coming 5 years.
Final question here, Professor Low, because you are the man who coined the phrase, I think, pertinent to Macau, casino capitalism. And the corresponding side of that is social welfarism. And you have said how these run very deep, and they have done for decades in Macau. So not just to shift the economy, but also to shift expectations in terms of welfare needs in the economy. How is the central government meeting these needs that the people in Macau will be looking to their government to meet? Final question.
Yes, President Xi Jinping yesterday mentioned the importance of the improvement of the people's livelihood in Macau. So as such, we can expect the new Macau government, headed by Sam Ho-fei, will continue to distribute social welfare and enhance housing policy to the ordinary people of Macau. On the other hand, because of economic diversification emphasis, we can expect a casino capitalism will be diluted to some extent, although the government revenues come mainly still from the casino industry. So we believe that actually there will be a kind of a fine balance between casino capitalism and social welfarism. Casino capitalism providing still a major chunk of government revenue, while social welfarism will be deepened by extracting the revenues from casinos.
All right, so phased sort of diversification. Thank you, Sun Shu Hing, Professor and Deputy Director of HKU Space, speaking to us there live. We're still ahead on East Asia tonight. The Japanese yen rising slightly as it tries to recover from 5-month lows against the dollar. The Chinese plane C919 takes its 1 millionth customer to the skies as manufacturer Comac still eyes an international foothold. It's time for business with Roland Lim. Roland, central banks making a string of decisions today, but today, or rather this week, but today it's time for China to make its move.
Right you are, Wei Su. And the People's Bank of China did not surprise the markets. Now, China has kept its benchmark lending rates unchanged, as expected, at its monthly fixing earlier this morning. It stood pat, despite persistent deflationary pressures as a weakening RMB limited the scope for immediate monetary easing. Now, the 5-year loan prime rate, a gauge for mortgages, is at 3.6%, while the 1-year LPR is at 3.1%. The renminbi has hit its weakest level in over a year due to the widening difference in yields between the US and China. The People's Bank of China also sent a message of caution for banks to guard against interest rate risks when trading in bonds. This indicates policymakers' discomfort over a bond frenzy that has pushed yields lower. Earlier this month, Chinese officials said that the country will adopt an appropriately loose monetary policy next year in a bid to help the economy. Greater China markets have ended the day marginally in the red. Shenzhen reversing course about 3 hours ago, but the Shanghai Composite paring off some of its earlier losses. Japanese finance officials have made what is seen as a rare explicit warning against currency speculation as the yen threatened to resume its weakening trend against the US dollar. Finance Minister Katsunobu Kato and the country's top currency diplomat Atsushi Mimura both noting that they were alarmed by the yen's movements and that action will be taken against excessive fluctuations. Now, their comments comes a day after the Bank of Japan kept interest rates unchanged and did not provide much detail on when it'll raise borrowing costs. This suggests that the US-Japan interest rate differentials may not narrow as fast as previously expected, given that the Federal Reserve signaled a much slower monetary policy easing trajectory in 2025. The Bank of Japan last conducted a yen buying intervention in July to support its currency after it tumbled to a 38-year low. The currency pair is trading around the 157 mark, while the Nikkei 225 ending in the red by 0.3%. Chinese aircraft maker Comac is on cloud 9 as its C919 plane carried its 1 millionth passenger. The lucky traveler, surnamed Lin, took a flight from Shanghai to Xi'an and was given a model of the C919. It's a significant milestone for a plane that had its doubters when it first launched in May of last year. Now, Chinese airlines use the planes to serve some 10 cities, and Comac is eyeing overseas expansion with an office in Singapore. But for now, the plane is only in operation in China. Comac has delivered a total of some 14 C919 aircraft to China Eastern Airlines, Air China, and China Southern Airlines, which have opened a total of 15 routes to serve 10 cities. Comac says that there are some 330 orders for its C919 and C909 this year, 50 of which have been delivered. Now, for more on this significant milestone, we're joined by our very own correspondent, Deborah Wong, and she joins us live from Shenzhen. Deborah, good to have you on the show again. Chinese airlines are buying into the C919s. But in terms of getting a global presence, though, what is the company's plans, especially at a time when Boeing, US plane maker, is actually going through some corporate turbulence?
So Comac has set up 2 offices outside mainland China, namely in Hong Kong and in Singapore. So for Hong Kong, its airport authority has already agreed to support international flight operations of the C919. And Comac will also be working with a Hong Kong-based aircraft maintenance group to service its clients. But so far, there hasn't been any Hong Kong-based airline that's ordered any Comac planes yet. For its Singapore outfit, Comac is hoping that it can touch on Singapore to serve its Asia-Pacific clients. And, it's also hoping to work with international airlines, maintenance partners, and suppliers in the region. In fact, we did see Comac making some waves, when it had its international debut at the Singapore Air Show earlier this year. Lots of aviation executives turned up with their huge number of delegates saying that they're hoping to see a very competitive third player in the industry that's dominated by Airbus and Boeing. So far, we've seen some Southeast Asian carriers already jumping on board. In fact, Indonesia's Transnusa has already flown Comac's Era J21 jet, and Brunei's Gallop Air ordered 30 Comac planes, but it's still waiting for regulatory approval to fly. So overall, interest hasn't quite translated to global orders just yet because, people are still waiting, adopting a wait-and-see approach. In fact, the plane hasn't seen any approvals from US and European regulatory bodies. It's only certified in China so far, and hence the hesitance at this moment.
Deborah, the C919 is marketed as homegrown, but the plane has components made by partners in Europe and the US. Would trade tensions be a worry for Comac's expansion plans, given that they have to rely on these parts from overseas?
Definitely, we can expect to see some trade tensions here because, Comac still relies on Western suppliers for key components in its plane. We're talking about engines, its avionics systems. In fact, back in 2018, when the trade war started, several of Comac's Western suppliers and R&D partners suspended collaboration with the company. And, with incoming US President Donald Trump pledging to launch even more tariffs on China, as well as adopting a harder line approach on China, we can expect to see some tightening of more exports. In fact, in this past month, we've already seen an acceleration of the trade war happen involving export controls on semiconductor chips. And in retaliation, Chinese industry associations urge its members not to buy US products. So we're seeing China increasingly pumping money to develop its own tech resilience. We're also seeing them potentially creating its own domestic substitutes for the plane components. But it will be a very long runway for that to happen. So we're seeing at this point in time, Comac focus more on growing its domestic capability. It's also drumming up interest and reaching out to buyers from members under its Belt and Road Initiative, as well as suppliers in the region.
And we'll be keeping track on how Comac keeps flight on board the plane. Thank you. Deborah Wong in Shenzhen. South Korean authorities say they will loosen foreign exchange regulations and allow more corporate borrowings abroad. The move is in a bid to defend the won that is trading at a 15-year low. In a statement, the finance ministry said that in a joint statement with the central bank and regulatory agencies that strict regulations restrain the efficiency of foreign exchange management and that there is a need to take into account worsened foreign exchange liquidity conditions for the country after recent events. According to the statement, measures include allowing companies to take out loans in foreign currencies and exchange the funds for the Korean won if they are used for investing in facilities such as equipment, property and land purchases. Now, the South Korean won has dropped to its weakest level in 15 years on Thursday, weighed down by the US Fed's cautious stance on more interest rate cuts and the political drama at home after the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol. And that'll do it for the Business News. Wei Su, it's back to you.
And thanks for that, Roland. Still ahead on East Asia tonight. Investigators ordered suspended South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol to appear for a hearing on Christmas Day over his bid to impose martial law earlier this month. And the clock is ticking for a new deal to avert a U.S. government shutdown after the House rejected a Republican-backed spending bill. China's president calls on Macau's new government to diversify the economy of the world's largest gambling hub as the territory marks 25 years since its return to Chinese rule. An agreement in principle to search again for a plane that disappeared more than 10 years ago. 239 people were on board MH370 to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur, with most of those on board from China. The South Korean investigators deliver the second summons to the president after he failed to respond to the first. Yoon Suk-yeol ordered to appear on Christmas Day for questions on why he declared martial law. Mr. Yoon, who is Catholic, did not attend a hearing on Wednesday and gave no reason for his absence. The suspended president faces criminal charges of insurrection that could see him jailed for life. He's being investigated separately by prosecutors, as well as a joint team of police, defense ministry, and anti-corruption officials. If Mr. Yoon shows up, he will become the first sitting president to appear before an investigative agency. The Constitutional Court is in the process of determining whether to uphold his impeachment. But for the third day running, its attempts to serve documents on the president have failed, meaning the justices could not meet him. Meanwhile, police say they have questioned Prime Minister Han Duck-soo over his role in the martial law decree that triggered the crisis. An official in his office says Mr. Han was questioned before he was made acting president last week. He was among 12 people at a cabinet meeting shortly before President Yoon went on TV to announce martial law. This is the first time Mr. Han is known to have undergone questioning as a suspect. Earlier this month, the main opposition Democratic Party reported him to police after accusing him of insurrection. Mr. Han has said he opposed the emergency decree. And that uncertainty in South Korean political circles putting a damper on year-end festivities. Businesses in food and hospitality seeing a drop in their takings during what is traditionally one of the busiest periods, capping off a disappointing year for the South Korean economy. The central bank chief says he expects GDP growth this year to fall slightly to 2.1% from an earlier forecast of 2.2%. CNA's Lim Yeon-suk tells us more.
For nearly 2 weeks, rallies protesting against President Yoon Suk-yeol's short-lived attempt to impose martial law were staged every day on the streets of Yeouido, where Seoul's National Assembly is located. As demonstrators thronged the streets, many others chose to stay away. Restaurant owner Ju Na says even before this, business has been poor compared to last year. She had been hoping to recoup some of her losses this month.
작년보다는 올해 좀 훨씬 힘들고 또 11월부터 작년의 매출에 비해서 몇천 원 떨어졌어요. 근데 좀 낮을 거라 연말 장사를 대비해서 저희가 준비를 많이 해놨는데 3일날 그 계엄 때문에 터지면서 더욱더 취소가 많이 되고.
But Ms. Chu says many customers have since rebooked. That's as protests dwindled after the National Assembly voted to impeach Mr. Yoon on 14th of December and called on South Koreans to move forward.
마지막으로 국민 여러분의 연말이 조금 더 행복하기를 바랍니다. 취소했던 송년회 재개하시기를 당부드립니다. 자영업, 소상공인, 골목 경제가 너무 어렵습니다. 대한민국의 미래는 우리의 희망은 국민 속에 있습니다.
Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok made a similar plea, urging South Koreans to support small business owners. And some of those CNA spoke to are planning to do that.
계엄 상태 때문에 이제 좀 나라에 대한 걱정들도 있다 보니까 좀 전체적으로 좀 이렇게 침체되고 좀 자제하려는 분위기가 있는 것 같습니다. 저도 사실 뭐 연말에 좀 이렇게 모임들이 있었는데 그런 좀 분위기 때문에 이게 좀 다음에 뭐 내년에 좀 모이자 뭐 이렇게 좀 취소된 부분도 좀 있고요.
예전 같은 느낌은 아닐 것 같긴 한데 뭐 당장 제 주변에 있는 사람은 이제 다시 좀 정상화될 거란 기대를 하고서 다시 또 이제 일정을 잡으려고 하는 것 같아요. 그래서 저도 지금 당장 이제 모임을 하러 가긴 하고요.
In a recent survey, nearly half of about 500 small business owners and self-employed individuals in the food service and hospitality sectors reported losses due to the political uncertainty. The poll was conducted by the Korea Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises last week. But Professor Chin Hyun-jung says he thinks the political turmoil will have less impact on the economy compared to when former President Park Geun-hye was impeached in 2016.
경제가 불안정하지만 정치적 불안정성이 해소되면 다시 돌아오더라는 것을 이제 한번 우리가 경험을 했지 않습니까? 박근혜 대통령 시절의 탄핵 시절에 비하면은 조금 더 빨리 된 게 있어서 소비자들 입장에서는 그때보다는 확실히 덜 충격을 받지 않았을까?
That said, Professor Chin pointed out that South Korea's economy has been losing momentum.
글로벌 공급망 불안도 있었고 또 하나는 이제 미중 무역 갈등도 있었고 그 와중에서 물가도 오르고 하면서 우리 경제가 안 좋아졌었는데 그 여파가 계속 미치고 있었어요. 영향을요. 그렇게 긍정적이지 않은 쪽으로. 그래서 뭐 이미 그 전에도 여름 좀 지나면서도 현대경제연구원이나 OECD에서도 한국의 경제 성장률을 좀 낮추고 있었거든요.
He expects the economic shock from the political uncertainty to start easing as early as next month, but predicts that the gloomy growth outlook will persist for some time. Christmas and New Year celebrations could bring some cheer to businesses here, but analysts at home and abroad say South Korea's economy will grow at a slower than expected pace in 2025 as people are spending less, in another blow to the country which is already enduring one of its worst crises in decades. Lim Yeon-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Malaysia has decided to resume search operations for missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, which disappeared in 2014 in the southern Indian Ocean. Transport Minister Anthony Loke announced that decision that it was based on new information presented by US-based private marine exploration company Ocean Infinity. CNA's Afifa Arifin has all the details.
Malaysia is finalising terms for an expanded undersea search area of more than 15,000 square kilometres off the coast of Western Australia. The Cabinet has agreed to collaborate with Ocean Infinity on a no-find, no-fee basis, meaning no payment will be made if the wreckage is not found. Transport Minister Anthony Loke says the terms are expected to be finalised by early 2025. The search operation is projected to span 18 months and will cost an estimated $70 million if successful. The new search area is based on the latest data and analysis from Ocean Infinity and other experts.
Our team has gone through and they felt that it is credible, and they have been based on the research of many other experts. And Ocean Infinity, of course, took into considerations all the findings by the various researchers. So, I mean, as far as Malaysian government is concerned, we think that this is another attempt to find MH370, and it is our responsibility and our obligation and our commitment to the families and especially to the next of kin that the government will continue this search.
Search operations could begin as soon as the contract is formalised, with optimal conditions for exploration in the South Indian Ocean occurring between January and April. Mr. Loke confirmed that the families of MH370 victims have been informed of the government's decision.
I'm happy. You know, it's just like I'm receiving my Christmas present early. Hearing this news that they are agreeable to start the search. Finally, all the waiting is almost done, and Now it's just for them to go out to sea, to the Indian Ocean, and to look for the plane. And I'm praying, I'm hopeful that this time round, they will succeed in finding the plane.
On March 8, 2014, Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur bound for Beijing, carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew members. The Boeing 777 vanished mid-flight and has not been seen since. After the plane's disappearance, Malaysia, China and Australia jointly searched a 120,000 square kilometre area in the southern Indian Ocean. That effort concluded in January 2017 without significant findings. Ocean Infinity had previously conducted independent searches in 2017 and 2018. Afifa Arifin, CNA, Putrajaya.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry has called for the independence and sovereignty of Pacific Island nations to be respected after Australia unveiled a new security pact worth nearly $120 million with the Solomon Islands, aimed at curbing China's influence in the region. The ministry spokesperson says no country should treat island nations as their backyard, and that they should instead complement each other's strengths and coordinate and cooperate. The deal between Australia and the Solomon Islands includes infrastructure support, with a new police training centre to be built in the capital. Australia's Prime Minister says the package will provide the country with what he calls enduring sovereign security capabilities, while reducing its dependence on external partners.
My government is proud to make a significant investment in the police force of the Solomon Islands to ensure that they can continue to take primary responsibility for security in the Solomons. What we've done is make sure that Australia remains the security partner of choice.
China has also been offering police training to the Solomon Islands after the signing of a security pact back in 2022. Well, that deal raised concerns in Canberra and its Western allies about Beijing's growing presence in Australia's backyard. CNA's Roger Maynard looks at the significance of this deal.
The Australian government will certainly see it as a step in the right direction. Canberra has already agreed similar deals with Nauru and Papua New Guinea, but the Solomons arrangement is arguably a much more important deal given the island's close relations with China. But this won't necessarily mean an end to the current Chinese presence in the Solomons. In fact, Mr Albanese would not say whether there was an expectation that Chinese forces would pull out. So there are still question marks over what this agreement will really mean in the long term for security arrangements between Australia and the Solomons. Australia has always had warm ties with its Pacific neighbours, but in recent years it's been accused of taking its eye off the ball, so to speak, and allowing China to grow its influence in the region. Australia's climate policy has not always endeared itself to the Pacific Islands, nor has its foreign relations strategy. So there are a lot of bridges to be built here if Canberra is to restore its position in the Pacific and keep Beijing at bay. And there's a lot at stake too. If China were able to create a military presence in the Solomons, for example, it could isolate Australia from its Western allies, such as the United States. That's why Canberra is keen to bolster security ties with places like Nauru, Papua New Guinea, and other Pacific Island nations.
US prosecutors have arrested a Chinese national on charges of acting as an agent for Beijing while getting involved in local politics. The case adds to growing US concerns that China is using a network of agents to sway the results of local elections. Charging documents say the 64-year-old man allegedly worked as campaign manager for a Southern California politician in 2022. He's accused of conspiring with a convicted Chinese agent and writing a report for Chinese officials detailing how he helped that politician get elected. The two men also allegedly asked for money to fund more pro-Beijing activities in the United States. U.S. Attorney for California, Martin Estrada, says he sees the case as part of, quote, a disturbing trend in which China seeks to influence U.S. domestic policy, and of Chinese officials helping politicians seen as friendly to Beijing get elected. China has not responded in detail, but its foreign ministry told reporters today that Beijing never interferes in other countries' internal affairs. The US Republicans are vowing to regroup and come up with another solution after a hastily assembled proposal to avert a government shutdown failed to pass in the House. The clock is running down fast with barely a day left to seal a deal.
On this vote, the yeas are 174, the nays are 235, one voting present, two-thirds not being in the affirmative. The rules are not suspended and the bill is not passed.
The GOP-led bill proposed extending funding for 3 months and suspending the debt ceiling for 2 years, in line with demands from the president-elect. Donald Trump had killed a previous bill calling for an increase in government spending, a demand that was backed by his efficiency chief, that's billionaire Elon Musk. Democrats claim negotiations were not carried out in good faith by the Republicans, who voiced disappointment in the failure of the bill.
Gave us your word that we were going to move forward together on behalf of the American people. It was a Republican-drafted bill that was posted by House Republicans. And then one or two puppet masters weigh in, and the extreme MAGA Republicans decide to do the bidding of the wealthy, the well-off, the well-connected, millionaires and billionaires, not working-class people.
Very disappointing to us that all but 2 Democrats voted against aid to farmers and ranchers, against disaster relief, against all these bipartisan measures that had already been negotiated and decided upon.
The country is staring at an imminent shutdown as approval for existing federal spending expires tonight, meaning starting tomorrow, or that Saturday, the U.S. government could be partially crippled. Shutters coming down on federal agencies and national parks, while pockets are hit hard. At least 2 million federal workers could miss their paychecks in the lead-up to Christmas. Our states also stand to lose out on funding and disaster relief. Benji Haya lays out what could have led to this political paralysis in Washington.
These 2 men, Trump and Musk, they have slightly different motivations. Elon Musk, in his new role, he's keen to tighten those purse strings. Donald Trump, he wants the debt ceiling increased so he can clear the deck, essentially, for his plans, his huge tax cuts, his increased funding of border security. That would add trillions to the debt pile. Now, the thing to remember is that condition by Trump is opposed by many fiscally conservative lawmakers on his own side. So frankly, this is a total mess. It is government workers as well. It is the nation's economy as a whole that will pay the price over this festive period. The Biden administration warning a shutdown, if it happens, would hurt hard-working Americans and, quote, create instability across the country.
Still ahead on East Asia tonight, Taiwan's military holds paratrooper drills amid heightened tensions with China. And Taipei enlists the help of dogs to sniff out trees at risk of collapse. Fights breaking out amongst lawmakers in Taiwan over proposed bills that President William Lai's Democratic Progressive Party are trying to block, claiming they could damage the island's democracy. Some were tackled and others doused with water as DPP lawmakers occupied the podium in Parliament and barricaded themselves inside. They're hoping to stop legal amendments that the opposition Kuomintang and the Taiwan People's Party hope to pass on the strength of their majority. Amongst disputed bills, a proposed revision to the Public Officials Election and Recall Act. KMT hopes to prevent what it sees as misuse of power to recall elected representatives, while the DPP lawmakers fear the same move could revoke voters' rights to remove unfit officials. A DPP in a statement warned that Taiwan's democratic self-checking and self-repairing mechanism could be lost should these amendments proceed. Taiwan's military is conducting paratrooper drills in the southern city of Pingtung. The exercises, which began yesterday, come at a time of heightened tensions between Taipei and Beijing. The island's military says it's evolving away from large-scale airborne operations of the past to focus on smaller deployments such as infiltration in specific zones. It also wants to provide additional training for troops, virtual reality or VR simulators being used to give troops a better sense of landing scenarios. An official says while Taiwan is principally concerned with defense, retaining its airborne capacity remains a priority.
他现在受的是渗透专场训练班，但他完训之后，他必须要往上一阶，所谓的高空渗透跳伞专场班。完训之后呢，再依序的向上，所谓的高空跳伞师资班。完成了这些之后，才能够备取我们所谓的神龙校组的一员。
Falling trees cause death and injury around the world every year. In Taipei, where there's an abundance of green areas, authorities are trying to preempt that danger with a team of sniffer dogs. CNA's Victoria Jen tells us more.
Meet Lucy, a 9-year-old beagle with a nose for finding trees that need help. Since she was 1 year old, Lucy has been roaming around Taipei every day to sniff out a deadly tree disease that's been plaguing the city's urban forests. She's specialized in detecting brown root rot disease that attacks tree roots and causes decay. The fungal infection is responsible for 90% of tree collapses in the city outside of typhoon season.
Lucy 刚才闻到这边有这个鹤根面的气味，她就坐下在这边，表示说这边有这个鹤根面的气味从这边散发出来，然后 Lucy 就会一直去用她的鼻子去指示这个点。政策犬它的主要的优点就是它比较快速，然后可以很快速的去做一个大面积的初步的判断有没有鹤根病的存在的可能。那有的话，再去后续做这个针对性的采样检测，这样子整个效率也会比较提升。
All across Taipei, there are some 200,000 trees, and sniffer dogs like Lucy to inspect around 8,000 trees every year.
Good job, Lucy. Sniffer dogs like Lucy play a crucial role in the city's fight against sick trees. Every year, Taipei City finds 300 to 400 sick trees, and about 30% are detected by sniffer dogs.
Brown root rot disease is particularly challenging to detect because it starts underground, attacking tree roots. By the time symptoms become apparent, it's often too late. It takes at least 2 canine tree doctors to confirm a diagnosis.
它一只狗先闻过去之后，然后那如果这只狗已经是阳性，它会让另外一只狗再来闻一次。那如果2只狗都坐下，这个数才是比较确定是得阳性。
As gentle and good-natured as she is, Lucy is part of an elite team of canines, specially selected and trained for the job.
这个狗训练起来，它其实是有一些条件限制，因为像米格鲁的话，它的嗅觉要够灵敏，然后它的个性要够稳定，还有就是它对奖励的部分，它要有很大的渴望，才有办法训练。所以它训练起来的话，10只狗可能只有1只米格鲁可能成为那个检疫犬。
Despite the challenges, the government hopes to expand its canine detection team, recognizing the unique role these dogs play in urban safety. It plans to double the funding for the canine tree doctors to $90,000 next year, with the new pair joining the force in March. Victoria Jen, CNA, Taipei.
And this East Asia Tonight this Friday. Don't forget headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. Plus, we're on Facebook and YouTube.